Good afternoon, Monsieur le Ministre, Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, and all who are online today. Thank you for joining us for this conversation with Minister Bruno Le Maire and Professor Richard Baldwin on the post-COVID global economy. This event is hosted by the Graduate Institute and its Geneva Trade Platform. Together, we're delighted to host this afternoon's conversation in hybrid form, where we have some of our speakers here in person with us and some online. A recording of this event will be available afterwards, also online. As Minister Le Maire will need to leave us promptly at 3:30, we are going to be very efficient today. And with that in mind, I'm delighted to introduce Marie-Laure Salle, who is the Director of the Graduate Institute for International and Development Studies, to provide her welcoming remarks. Marie-Laure, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Caroline. Monsieur le Maire, Monsieur le Ministre, I'm very honored, very happy to welcome you at the Graduate Institute in Geneva, or rather, you welcoming me. Cher Monsieur l'Ambassadeur, dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for joining us today. The first and the only time we met, Monsieur le Maire, was a few years ago. I don't know if you will remember. It was under beautiful sunshine at the Napoleon's conference in Arles. It very much feels like the world before. In hindsight, there was a lightness to that gathering, a taking for granted that the world was as it was and that it would remain essentially so. Naturally, we did speak about big issues. We spoke about climate and environmental threats. We spoke about the risks that digital technologies may represent for our democracies. We talked about the deep economic, social, and political consequences of widening inequalities. Yet, it seems to me that we talked about all these as possible futures, not as real presents. The last year has marked a radical turning point in that context. The challenges we discussed then are not of the future, they are with us now, today. The global health crisis is not only itself a huge challenge, but it is actualizing, one could argue, key questions that were already salient well before March 2020. Do open economies make sense when nations are closing off from one another and within themselves? Our democracies are under siege in ways that are reminiscent of times we thought were gone forever. What will emerge from this for international collaboration in the future? What does globalization mean today? The future of work will also be an explosive question in the coming years. Speaking to the survival, physical and psychological of vast portions of our societies. What is our children's future? How can they achieve lives of meaning? It is one thing to consider adaptability to changing jobs. It's another to ponder a society where jobs would become an anachronism. In the context of digital disruption, Yuval Harari has repeatedly warned us since 2017 about the move from the working class to the, I quote, useless class. Is Harari's prediction becoming even more likely in the post-COVID world? The responsibility of decision makers in this context is heavy. And we are very lucky today to be hearing from you, Minister Le Maire, you who are yourself directly and gravely, I would add, confronting these questions and so many more. Monsieur le Ministre, encore une fois, un grand merci à vous d'être ici aujourd'hui avec nous. To reflect and discuss further the Minister's remark, he will be joined on stage by our own Richard Baldwin. Richard is Professor of International Economics at the Graduate Institute, the co-director of our Center for Trade and Economic Integration, and naturally, as you all know, a prolific author. Let me finish on a few words on the Graduate Institute. The Graduate Institute Geneva was born with the League of Nations as an academic entity specializing in the then emerging questions of international collaboration. We still have three key functions. We do research on global challenges, international governance and development. We train future generations of decision makers in and around the world of international collaboration broadly. And we provide a forum for academics, practitioners, and a broad diversity of voices to debate and to work jointly. This afternoon's event has been organized, as was mentioned already, by the Geneva Trade Platform, which supports informed, accessible, and inclusive conversations on international trade and the global economy. Let me thank the entire team for their work and Dr. Caroline Birbeck for the moderation role that she will be playing. Without further ado, Monsieur le Ministre, merci encore, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Merci, chère Marie-Laure. Je me souviens très bien de notre rencontre à Arles il y a quelques années, en marge des Napoléons. Il y avait une belle discussion. Il faisait aussi chaud qu'aujourd'hui à Genève, un aussi beau soleil. Et j'espère que nos discussions vont être aussi fructueuses aujourd'hui à Genève qu'elles avaient été en Arles il y a quelques années. Merci aussi à Richard d'animer le débat. Je connais vos ouvrages, vos livres, vos réflexions, et c'est donc un grand honneur pour moi d'être interrogé ensuite par vous, qui êtes un très fin connaisseur des relations internationales. Et merci enfin à l'Institut qui nous accueille aujourd'hui pour la qualité de son accueil et la beauté des locaux. Ladies and gentlemen, much has been said about the consequences of COVID and the post-crisis world. I will therefore share thoughts in all humility. One area to which the precautionary principle should definitely apply is politicians' speeches. Politicians often predict things that do not actually happen, while they unwittingly trigger events that they had not foreseen. This is why I will limit myself to sharing with you one thought, 4 beliefs, and 1 wish that I hope will not be wishful thinking. My thoughts, first of all, go out to the families who have been affected by the pandemic and who are grieving for a loved one. My thoughts go out to those who are in pain. They extend to caregivers, nurses, hospital staff, all those remarkable men and women who are close to burnout, yet who still devote themselves to us. In France, as everywhere else in Europe, we made a clear choice. Health takes precedence over the economy. Health comes first and will always come first. It's about self-respect. It's about dignity. It is in line with the decisions the French president took yesterday. I really think that the decisions taken by President Macron yesterday are the right ones. They are well targeted. They are balanced. They achieve the right balance between health protection and economic activity. I will give precisions about the impact of those decisions on economic activity and growth in France by the end of the week. I also want to share 4 beliefs. My first belief is that we have learned the lessons from previous crises in Europe. In Europe, we did not repeat the past mistakes of 1929 and 2008. We did not let down our businesses or our workers. We learned the lessons of the 1929 crisis and provided massive financial and social support to households and businesses. Emmanuel Macron's "whatever it takes" is what has saved the French economy. That will allow for a stronger rebound once the pandemic is behind us. If the handling of the health crisis can be open to criticism, the economic and social response has been robust. We also learned the lessons of the 2008 crisis. We did not and should not rush to restore public finances. We extended the general escape clause to 2022. Let me be clear. Our priority at the European level must be to come back as early as possible to our pre-crisis GDP level, not to achieve fiscal balance. Time will come when fiscal balance will be the thing again, but not before growth is back and steady. Fiscal balance should by no means take precedence over growth. My second belief is that there is no such thing as a post-COVID world. There is only one world, our world. A world that proved vulnerable during the crisis. A world each of us shares responsibility for. For centuries in Europe, we considered the Earth to be the plaything of our technology. We have relentlessly tapped into natural resources. We have drawn on our reserves. We have tried to shape the world to our advantage. We have acted as if resources were inexhaustible, as if regeneration was infinite. In short, we have taken our Earth for granted. The crisis has reminded us just how vulnerable the world is. It has shown us that living forces can turn against us and transform the world into a very hostile place. A very hostile world is no longer a home, it is hell on earth. The environment is the most pressing issue we will have to face over the next centuries. Should we then abandon scientific progress? Should we let the world return to its natural state? Certainly not. Undomesticated nature is just as much of a hell. An untamed natural world is fundamentally inhospitable and dangerous. Nature is by essence indifferent to mankind. No, what I mean is that we should use technology to reconcile progress with sustainability. We must pave the way for people to live healthier and longer lives without making the earth pay for it. We must use our brain power to draw on nature rather than exploiting it, to preserving the environment rather than destroying it. I will take one example to illustrate my point: energy. We will have, over the next decades, a massive need for decarbonized energy. We will need to rely on decarbonized technologies to produce such energy. This means renewable energy sources, of course, but also nuclear energy. France, therefore, will continue investing in nuclear power. And we are not the only ones. Among European countries, there are Hungary, Romania, Slovakia, and Poland, and worldwide, China, India, United Arab Emirates. France is putting forward €500 million in its recovery plan to advance research in this area. We believe that nuclear power is part of the solution to move towards decarbonized electricity generation, and we want it to be recognized as such in the European taxonomy. This will not stop us from investing heavily in other disruptive technologies such as hydrogen. We will invest €7 billion in hydrogen technologies as part of our recovery plan. Together with Germany, we want to hasten the development of hydrogen power in order to decarbonize industry and for transport. What conclusions do I draw from this specific example on energy? Innovation. Innovation is the only way forward to reconcile technological progress with sustainability. Innovation is the key to our future world. Innovation is our Swiss Army knife. It allows us to fight global warming by observing the Earth thanks to Copernicus, to manage energy use thanks to artificial intelligence, to produce clean energy thanks to hydrogen, to develop new nuclear technologies by investing in small and medium-sized reactors. My third belief is that trade alone cannot solve everything. It goes hand in hand with optimizing productive independence. We need trade for growth. Trade is part of what makes us prosperous. But autonomy is also part of our prosperity, and independence is invaluable. At the height of the pandemic, public hospitals in developed countries became aware of a key reality. We remain dependent on the production of foreign continents for critical goods. We lacked personal protective equipment. This dependence affects other strategic sectors for our nation. We lacked semiconductors for the automotive industry, batteries for our electric cars. We Europeans, in a dramatic shift in global powers, have become dependent on Asia and China to sustain our daily life. This dependency is dangerous. It is politically unacceptable. It makes us economically vulnerable. So the crisis was also a salutary wake-up call. However, rejecting trade altogether is a false solution. Globalization can serve us well, including to improve economic resilience when caught up in economic crisis. It enables us to diversify suppliers. It gives us access to the world's best innovations. Globalization is here to stay. The fact that the level of trade is already back to where it was in 2019 is alone proof of this. This is a fact. We have a French expression that would literally translate into, it is in the cork that you see the wine. I might add, it is with a container ship blocked in the Suez Canal that you know how much global trade has resumed. What does this wake-up call mean? It means we need to identify strategic value chains and make sure we secure their development on our European and American continents. Biden's America has started such work. Whatever we may think about it, the American stimulus plan shows ambition, and the return of US ambition is a good thing for the rest of the world. It is a good thing for Europe. The best response to US ambition is not to fight US ambition, it is to match it. Europe needs to challenge itself like America does. It needs to be ambitious. It needs to be bold for our competitiveness, our jobs, our innovative capacities. Europe must do more and can do more. We should not get bogged down in complicated calculations about whether we should revert to fiscal discipline in January or in September or in December 2022. Our ambition should rather be to revert to strong growth and good jobs for everybody. Europe, under the leadership of France and Germany, has made more progress towards shaping a common industrial policy in the last 12 months than in half a century of existence. This is a very positive outcome of the crisis. Europe is now working on identifying strategic value chains. It is open to public support to foster industrial development. It is developing new competition tools. It is a complete overhaul of Europe's industrial policy thinking. And this complete overhaul is the very best news of the post-COVID crisis. Europe's leisurely pace has given way to a new taste for speed. In a time frame of less than 2 years, we will have agreed on important projects of common European interest on electric batteries, on semiconductors, on sovereign cloud, and on hydrogen. And we are working on new projects in health and biotechnology. We should not be naive. We should not underestimate the challenges that we will have to face. Today, TSMC, the Taiwanese leader on semiconductor, just decided to invest $100 billion over the next 3 years. $100 billion. We will have to work with TSMC if we want to be successful on semiconductors. Europe has also scaled up its level of ambition. We must dare to be ambitious. Europe must dare to be ambitious and to have great ambitions. We are not a small continent, we are a big continent. We are a rich continent. We have know-hows, we have technologies, we have the best universities. We must have ambitious, we must stay ambitious for the generations to come. We will only set one single limit to our economic ambition, global warming. When we launch an IPCEI on semiconductors, to come back to this key question, we prioritize funding of semiconductors above 10 nanometers. But we stand ready, as I just said, to cooperation with Taiwan and with TSMC on semiconductors below 10 nanometers. We are considering deploying a low-orbit satellite constellation that would compete with US and Chinese constellations. We are reflecting on the next generation of launchers. With the fight against global warming as our compass, Europe must reconnect with its questing spirit, with its love for progress, with the willingness of doing better and the determination to be the best. My fourth belief, we are entering an era of national empires. The British are an eccentric people. The latest eccentricity of this old empire was to leave the European Union at a time when the European Union was more necessary than ever before. They choose splendid isolation when we choose the splendid unification of our strength. They grieve a dying empire, the Commonwealth, but do not dare to contribute to a nascent one, Europe. It's a pity for the UK. It's a pity for us, Europeans. We needed the UK, especially in the field of defense. The Brits tell us that the slow vaccine rollout does not argue in favor of Europe. But let's look beyond the jabs. Let's look at the balance of global powers over time. What does shape global powers? 3 strategic elements should guide our policy choices in the coming decades. Number 1 is demography. There is no power without a dynamic demography. Aging is costly. Public policies should in no way neglect demography. Number 2 is technological innovation. There is no political sovereignty without technological sovereignty. It used to be a geopolitical rule before quantum computing, artificial intelligence, new energies raised it to the next level. It has become not only a rule, but a law. The only drawback to breakthrough innovations is the huge costs. Such costs can only be borne if we pool our forces together. No EU member state alone can invest 30 billion euros to advance hydrogen. Together, though, we can. No EU member state alone can build a semiconductor plant. Together, we can. No EU member state alone can create new factories for electric car batteries. Together, we can. So we have to stand together if we want to meet the challenge of innovation and disruptive technologies. If we want to face the challenge together with China and with the US. European countries must stand together, must invest together, must fund together disruptive technologies. Innovation and investment are key to the 21st century. The winners of the 21st century will be the countries that will have the necessary financial means to fund new technologies and disruptive technologies. The other ones will just have to stick to where they are and will not have the possibility to develop at the same pace. Let's be aware of that. Innovation and investment are key to the 21st century. China, in its most recent 5-year plan, introduced a 75% research tax credit. This is a clear evidence that innovation and investment in technologies is absolutely vital. Number 3, after demography and innovation, is culture. There is no lasting power without a strong culture. We are impressed by China when it defends new Silk Roads. We are aghast when they abuse Uyghurs. In one case, China's power increases. In the other one, it weakens. How does this new balance of power assert itself today? First, by protecting our technologies. We need to protect our technologies against industrial theft. This is truer than ever. This is the reason why we strengthened the French decree on foreign investment control. This is the reason why we see similar arrangements flourish elsewhere in Europe, as they have long existed in the United States. You cannot explain to your public opinion that you are investing so much public money to feed research on technologies and then let these technologies being theft by other continents and other powers. We must stand for the economic and societal choices we make. What is the point of decarbonizing our economy if production moves abroad and we re-import heavily carbonated goods? This is why we need a carbon border adjustment mechanism in Europe. That's just the point I explained this morning to the new General Director of the WTO. Last point, who will belong to this new club of national empires? China and the United States, obviously. Russia, by default. Turkey, by influence. And the European Union, too, if it becomes aware that history does not wait anybody. This is a sprint in which hesitations or delays in starting, implementing, and decision-making are clearly disqualifying. Let's be aware of that. We cannot wait. We have to decide, and we have to decide right now. Europe must assume political authority. Europe must stand up for its values, for its democratic ideals, for human respect, for combating global warming. Europe needs to find ways to act faster. Europe must be aware of its values and must be capable of defending them. Europe must be aware of the necessity of protecting democracies and being ready to pay the price for it. Is that possible only as a federated Europe? That's a question that will arise very frequently, but I do not believe so. The US cannot be the reference for European integration. Can we fully integrate while fully respecting individual nations? I believe so. We have to find ways to live with this paradox that is inherent to the European Union. An increasingly integrated Europe, yet made up of strong individual nations. We are a continent of nations. We have a history of nations. And we are made of different memories, different national memories that build a new political model, which names is Europe. European integration can and should only come about with the full respect of the individual nations that comprise it. What have we learned from the crisis? We have learned that clear and resolute choices will yield the best results. We have been successful in protecting our economy and in providing the required fiscal support, thanks to what? Thanks to the European Central Bank and the integrated euro area. Either we move towards such resolute choices, which must lead to a qualified majority on tax matters, to a common budget for the euro area, to fiscal solidarity, fiscal integration, to a banking union, and then we will play in the 21st century big leagues, or we keep hesitating between paths, and then we will disappear. The European Union was not meant to become the Soviet Union of the 21st century. It was not meant to collapse because we would not have been able to make bold and clear-sighted choices. There will be two national empires in the 21st century, China and the United States. We can build all together an empire of nations, Europe. One last point, my wish, which I hope will not be a wishful thinking. My hope is that the current chapter does not end up in conflict. What kind of conflict do I fear? The first one would be a showdown between big powers. Rivalry for the world's leading position could result in a conflict between the United States and China. This is why the European Union, the third largest power in the world, should not let itself be dragged into such a test of wills. Europe does not have to take sides. It must stand up for its values and interests, which brings it closer to the United States, but it should not break off its relations with China. Europe was not meant to stand in the midst of the battlefield of the 21st century. Its destiny is to ensure peace and play a crucial role in global climate ambition. My second fear relates to climate change. If we are not careful to defend jobs, to secure transitions, to ensure there is path forward, for in jobs that will disappear, we risk a public backlash such as the one we experienced in France with the Gilets jaunes. The climate transition does not mean rushing it, nor does it mean ignoring all those affected by the consequences of environmental degradation. The fight for the environment must not become the new class struggle in Western societies. Finally, and this will be my last word, there is a third risk of conflict: inequalities. Inequalities are a reality of the contemporary world. They must be tackled to prevent deep social and political conflicts. I thank you, and I look forward to responding to your questions. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Ministre, for sharing your thoughts, your beliefs, and your wishes. Many thought-provoking comments there. I'm going to turn the floor directly to Professor Baldwin, who I know has many topics he would like to discuss further with you. And for those who are online, I would just remind you that you are welcome to submit some questions. Professor Baldwin is going to take a couple of those in the context of his conversation with the minister. So please do send them along. Thank you very much. Richard, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, wow. Congratulations on that speech. Insightful, inspiring, managed to be a bit scary, a bit hopeful all at the same time. Thank you very much. I'm sure it will be food for thought for many of the students who, although virtually aren't in this building, are spiritually, and also a call to action, which I think is a great thing a speech should do. Where to start? Climate change, demography, innovation, trade, culture, industrial policy, digital giants, European integrations. We could be here all night. But what I'd like to do is start with something that's a little COVID, a little trade, and just pick up on two of the phrases you said. Trade and what you called optimize productive independence. Now that phrase, I think, will resonate. I think we'll hear that again. And you also said identify strategic value chains and make sure we secure their development in the American continent. Now, what I want to do is pose a series of questions leading up to something, and you just take the ones you want. But basically, what did private industry get wrong in this balance between optimizing cost reduction and risk? Because, of course, it's nothing new to private industry. There's tsunamis and floods and strikes. They all know about this. But what did they get wrong? And also, did they get it wrong in every industry? So there are some industries, classic agriculture and banking, where we can't leave it to the private sector. We have to regulate them. We do regulate them. And then sort of to bring it to a fruition, I want to come to the criteria question. How do we decide who are these strategic value chains? Because every industry will claim that they are strategic. So I'll just leave it there.
First of all, I will say hello to the students. I miss you, but I know that you are here. So thank you for being here and for listening to this talk. First of all, I think that the mistake we have made over the last 3 decades, I would say, is not to take into account the side prices of delocalization and the abandon of sovereignty, of independence, have a huge cost, but we did not care about this cost. When you decide to close down an industrial plant, you have social cost. Nobody is taking into account the social cost that result from the closing down of an industrial site. There are political costs. And I can tell you, since I'm elected in a region where the Front National is very high, that when you are shutting down one industrial plant, you are also feeding the extremist parties. The third point is that we have not taken into account the environmental costs. When you are producing goods 2,000, 4,000, 6,000 kilometers away from France, and you have them to bring them back, you are not taking into account the environmental cost. Now it's time to take into account all these side effects and all these side costs to have a clear assessment of the price of delocalization. Does it mean that we will have to relocate all industrial activities? Of course not. We have to be aware that this is not a possibility and this would not be wise. What is wise is to define the value chains on which we think that this is of our interest to be independent. How do we make the choice? Is it up to the political leaders to make the choice alone? Absolutely not. You have to take into account, I think, 3 key factors. The first one is, do you have the required industrial skills to develop this new value chain? When we decided with President Macron to invest so much money in hydrogen, and when Emmanuel Macron decided to invest so much money in hydrogen with Angela Merkel and with Germany, the first reason why we have taken this decision is that we had the industrial plans to develop that kind of energy. For instance, with Air Liquide in France. Otherwise, it's useless. You are just feeding value chains without having the industrial capacity of producing the goods. This is useless. The second criteria, which is absolutely vital, is the technologies. Do you have the basis technologies to accelerate the development of these new technologies? Let's take another example. On digital, for instance, I think it would be useless to try to remain in the race, it's too late. We don't have the necessary skills, the necessary technologies to be on the top on digital, on hydrogen, on artificial intelligence, on quantum calculation. That's totally different. I think that we can remain in the race because we have the skills, we have the know-how, and we have the people that are required, the universities, to be at the top. The third key question is the market, of course. Even if I'm a French minister, I believe in the state, but I also believe in the market. And I know that developing some new value chains without having a market to absorb the production and to absorb the goods would be totally foolish. When we are developing, just to keep the same example, when we are developing hydrogen capacities, this is because on trains, on cars, on aeronautics, we know that there is a market and that this market should be in less than 10 years mature, and that it will be very useful to have our own green hydrogen produced either in France or in Germany.
Thank you very much. So now I'm going to pivot to something a little broader and maybe oriented towards the students. In your remarks, you painted something that somebody might call a new Cold War in the near future even, a showdown between big powers, between club of national empires. You use the word empires. Now, how should the HAI students prepare for this world, or more generally, the young people who are entering a world which, we didn't see? Actually, I'm old enough to have seen the old Cold War, but this seems like a new thing. And especially this idea that you don't have to choose a lane. It's not the US lane or the Chinese lane, and we definitely don't want to stand in between. How should they prepare for this world?
I think that they should choose the European lane, which is a very singular one. And I want to tell them that, of course, they will have the key role to play, because it is up to them to define what they want, what is the kind of political purpose they want to stick to. So that's absolutely vital for all of them to be aware of their own responsibility. The world will be what you want the world to be. And do not hesitate to say, well, that's the kind of world we want to have. That's the kind of world we want to live in. This is up to you to take your responsibilities and to say very loudly what you want. Coming back to China and the US, this is, of course, the most important strategic question for the next decade. The United States have made the choice with Donald Trump to oppose China. The result of that was the creation of the most important single market around China with New Zealand, Australia, Japan, and other Asian countries. It proves not to be very efficient. Opposing China, to me, is not the right path. There is another path, which would be to ignore China and to ignore the fact that on some topics, for instance, on human rights, we do not share the same positions as China. On the protection of intellectual property, we do not share the same position as China. So ignoring the fact that we are different from China and that we have different values and sometimes different interests would be as foolish as opposing China in a kind of controversial path. I think that the third way is the right one. It is engaging China, explaining to China that on some topics we do not share the same point of view and we are ready to oppose. On the Uyghurs, we want to oppose China. On the human rights, we do not share the same values. And a value that you are not able to defend is not a value, it is nothing. We have to explain to China that on other topics we are ready to contribute and to cooperate. For instance, on finance, on some part of industries, on agriculture, for instance, we are working very well with China. That's fine. Let's continue. Maybe on energy, we could work better with China. That's fine. Let's continue. And there are other issues, the last ones, on which we want China to improve their decisions. For instance, on over-indebtedness, we have been working very hard with Emmanuel Macron to engage China to avoid over-indebtedness of African countries. They are moving in the right direction. So that's fine. And I think that this is the right way of proceeding, engaging China, not opposing them, not ignoring them, but trying to improve the cooperation between our two continents.
Thank you. Yes, in some sense, finding the interface between these two very different systems, realizing that they're never going to be the same, but they have to live together. I think that's the
Of course,
perfect.
you're right.
So let me turn to some student questions, which I have here, one from Jose Alman. He points out that COVID has greatly increased our reliance on digital just about everything, and led to some fears and anxieties ranging from cybercrime to privacy. So what should governments do about this heightened reliance on digital? Has the technology outrun the governance?
This is, of course, a major issue, and thank you for the question. You have to decide if you want to be led by democratic states or by digital giants. The difference between democratic governance and digital giants is that you can get rid of your government. You cannot get rid of the digital giants. So that's why I think it would be wise to put regulation on digital giants. It would be fair to impose a fair taxation on digital giants. You just said, and this is the truth, that the single economy that clearly benefited from the crisis is the digital economy. They have made huge profits from the crisis. Well, that's fine, but they have to pay the same level of taxes than small SMEs that are suffering from the crisis and that are still suffering from the crisis. You need regulation. You need, of course, fair taxation of digital giants. Nobody can understand why the biggest companies in the world, the digital giants, are not paying the same level of taxes than the smallest SMEs here in Geneva or in Italy or in Spain or in France. That's something totally unacceptable, and I hope that we will find a compromise on this key issue next summer within the OECD. And the last point is to think about the fact that there are giants, and this might raise some difficulty vis-à-vis the competition rules. And I'm very satisfied that the new Biden's administration is putting the question on the table. We have a problem with the competition rules when you are looking at the situation of the digital giants. So these are, to me, the three key points on which we must move on: regulation, taxation, competition rules.
Very good. Well, one way to phrase it is that some of these digital giants have done it by arbitraging taxation and regulation rules, some by undermining workers' rights, some by not paying taxes, but others have thrived playing, with the same rules and playing by the same regulations. And I think that's an important distinction between those who've played by the rules and those who haven't played by the rules. Time to make everybody play by the rules. So
you're right, and the key issue is that the rule is a rule when it is adopted and respected by everybody, not by only some of the digital giants, but by all the digital giants.
Thank you. So I have, I don't know if we have time for one more question, or are you going to close out?
One more.
One last question.
One last question. I want to know what's the role of the higher education sector in your vision of the future of Europe?
The first role, I would say. Clearly the first role. If we want to stay in the race, if we want to be independent, if we want to have our own technologies, and if we want to provide technologies to fight against climate change, I think that universities, education, skills are the most important issue. And that's very difficult because when you are investing, for instance, in an electric car batteries plant, you can see the result in less than 2 years. You had nothing before, and after your investment, 2 years later, you have a plant, you have 100 workers, and you can see the consequence of your decision. On education, highly educated people, this is a matter of 10, 15, 20 years, but that's the best investment you can do for the future of Europe.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We're turning it over to Caroline, who's just going to close.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Minister Le Maire and Professor Baldwin, for such a thought-provoking conversation on the future of the global economy. I know many of the students listening in today, and also my colleagues in the international community in Geneva, will especially appreciate the emphasis that you have placed, Minister, on the vision, the future vision for Europe, and also on the importance of a global economy that better addresses inequalities and uncertainty that so many people around the world face, and also the environmental crises that are so important, especially to the younger generation. So I really appreciated also your emphasis that economic policy making and trade policy making should be driven by public values and public policy goals. And I think here in international Geneva, it's important for us to recall that many governments around the world share the same concerns about public health, about decent work, about environmental protection, about sustainable development and national industrial development. The challenge for us here and the students we have at this institute is how can we cooperate internationally on these shared goals. So on behalf of the institute, I'd like to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today, to share your ideas. It's really been an honor to host you. And to close, I'd like to encourage any of you who enjoyed today's event to please sign up on our events list for future such events. Thank you so much.